All right, guys. So, Chapter 1 homework. If you do not have any, if you have any of this stuff from Chapter 1 missing, it is due by the end of the day, Friday. Otherwise, it will be a 0. Nope. Chapter 1. Now, we're starting Chapter 2. We're starting Chapter 2 today, and Chapter 2 and 3 is going to mainly revolve around quadratic functions.
What is a quadratic?
So, Chapter 2 is going to be working, and we're going to be looking at the properties of quadratic functions. Chapter 3 is mainly going to focus on solving. All right, guys, let's focus in. Now, the first thing we're going to look at with quadratics is transformations. We're moving it up, down, left, right, stretch, shrink, and reflections. All right, guys. All right, guys. So H, the value of H, whenever we have a number in H's spot, it's moving it to the left or to the right. In our left and right, when we're looking at the equation and determining if it moved left or right, is the opposite of what we think. Because if it's plus 3, it moved left 3. If it's minus 3, x minus 3 inside the parentheses, it's moving right 3.
Is that ax minus h?
Yes. And K is our up or down. Up and down is exactly what it looks like. If it's plus 3, it's up 3. If it's minus 3, it is down 3. Questions on this so far? All right, guys. Now, the first part of this here, the core concept, horizontal translation, is exactly what we're talking about. Horizontal, left, right. The value of H tells us how far it moves left or right. Vertical translation, up and down, the value of K tells us how much it moves up or down. Now, we look at this first one here, describe the transformation. Well, we're looking at this here. G of x is equal to x plus 4 minus 1. So inside the parentheses, we have x plus 4.
X plus 4.
So the 4
That's h.
is our h. It's moving it left or right. So we need to determine how far, if we're moving to left or right, because the movement we have is 4. Now, will this be 4 units to the left or 4 units to the right?
To the left.
Oh, because it's opposite, yeah.
So since it's plus 4, x plus 4, it would be left 4. If it was x minus 4 inside those parentheses, it would be right 4. The minus 1 on the outside is telling us how far we move up or down. And we're moving up or down 1.
We'd be moving down.
It would be down 1 because our up and down is exactly what it looks like. So the minus 1 would be
What?
down 1.
I didn't show something.
So let's focus in here. So the x plus 4 squared minus 1. So what we're saying is this graph here, the graph that was given to you, is the x squared function. So we're moving every point on this graph left 4 and down 1. Now one of the points that we have on this graph is 0, 0. So we would move it left 4, down 1, and our new point would be here. 1, 1. We would move it left 4 and then down 1.
What?
And our new graph would look something like this here. Because again, we're moving every point on that graph left 4 and down 1. So again, these transformations give us a good idea and understanding of how the graph will look after the transformation is applied. Questions on this here? We ready for the next one?
girlfriend.
You gotta don't think I'm listening, but I'm actually taking his information. You're not asking me to say. I know what he's talking about.
Okay, then do
All right.
that one.
Huh?
Do that one.
Do it. Do that one?
Yeah, you said you learned by listening. So.
I do, but I haven't listened enough. It takes a while. You gotta hammer it in there. I'm not joking.
So
Right.
inside the parentheses, so our x minus 3 tells us we're moving left or right a distance of 3. Now, would it be to the left or to the right?
No, to the right.
Raj,
It's
yeah,
in
Raj.
parentheses.
Our left and right's opposite of what we think. So here we're going right 3, which means graphically every point on this graph is going to move 3 units to the right. So 0, 0, 0, 3.
There's nothing outside of the parentheses. Besides the square.
And that's fine. Which means it's not moving up or down.
Up or down.
It's just left, right. So it's just right 3. We don't have to have more than one. We could have just one. Or we could have multiple. Questions on this here? We ready for the next one? How many transformations do we have here?
It's gonna be going down, 2.
Up.
Okay, not tripling. It's going right. So it's going down 2 and right.
It would be down 2 and right 2. Because the minus 2 outside would indeed be down 2. The minus 2, x minus 2 inside the parentheses, left and right, opposite what we think. So it'd be right 2. So it's right 2, down 2. So every point on that graph would move right 2 and down 2.
Pick up on that, Edward? I was just checking on this thing. Sure.
Don't pin on his face.
Right 2, down 2. Questions on this here, guys? We ready for the next one?
Yeah, this next one is left 5,
Up 1.
So the plus x plus 5 would indeed be left 5. And the plus 1 outside would indeed be up 1.
Man, this one's not too bad. Oh, right, okay.
Yeah, we're gonna do it.
X minus 1 squared plus 2. The x minus 1 is telling us it's moving where?
Right.
Right 1.
Wait. Oh, yeah. Wait.
And up 2.
Wait, what?
Right, 1,
Two.
up 2.
So the x minus 1 would be our right
Everything
1.
that-
Hey, you know what?
The plus 2 outside the parentheses would be up 2. Questions on this here?
Y'all see the vertical upside down.
All right, so if there's a negative outside the parentheses, so the general form here, if A is negative, then it is a reflection
Go pick that up.
You go pick it up. Your pin's down.
Right straight now, Art. You're not gonna back.
My left right before my eyes.
All right, guys. I might have to start probably move y'all.
It's gonna move. It's locked in, guys. We're not locking in.
Those fucking guys get touched by literally everybody.
That's what people that file. I need to.
All right, guys. If there's a negative being multiplied in front of the parentheses or in front of our x without parentheses, it's across the x-axis. If that negative is being multiplied by our x inside the parentheses, it is across the y.
Is this example 2 transformations?
Yes.
What's wrong here? I can't write in the notes now.
Vertical stretch and shrink, we've covered this before. If the value being multiplied in front of the parentheses or by x without parentheses. If it's a is greater than 1, it's a vertical stretch. If a is between 0 and 1, it's a vertical shrink. And the only other one we have is horizontal stretch. Now with horizontal stretch or shrink, we got to make sure we flip the value of b before we determine if it's a stretch or shrink. Okay. Levi, top drawer. On my desk.
Oh, give him a second. We're going to take a test.
Tom, hey, dude, I sharpened one. There's a sharpened one right here. Sorry about that. It's just not. Stop.
So let's look at this next example, guys.
It was him.
All right, guys. Bring it back in. G of x equals negative x squared, negative 1/2 x squared. So there are two transformations here. We have the negative and we have the 1/2. Those are two separate transformations. When we have a negative being multiplied in front of the x or set of parentheses, it is a is the negative inside parentheses or outside parentheses?
Outside.
Outside, because there are none written.
Would be x-axis.
It'd be across the x. If that negative is being multiplied by the x inside the parentheses, it is across the y-axis. So that takes care of the negative. The reflection is purely about that negative. Now the 1/2 is telling us it's a vertical stretch or shrink or horizontal stretch or shrink. Is the 1/2 inside or outside parentheses? Outside. So this would be a vertical stretch or shrink of 1/2. Vertical, we don't have to do anything to it. Now, is the 1/2 between 0 and 1 or greater than 1? It is between 0 and 1? Yes. Since it's between 0 and 1, it's a vertical shrink. So this here, the negative 1/2 x squared would be a reflection across the x-axis and a vertical shrink of 1/2. And that is it. Questions on this here? We ready for the next one?
So, vertical on horizontal shrink, that is, how do you tell if it's vertical or horizontal?
So let's look at this one here. And this, I think, will answer your question that how to differentiate between vertical stretch or shrink or horizontal stretch or shrink. So there are two transformations. We have the 2x squared plus 1. Let's worry about the plus 1 first. The addition of 1 outside the parentheses tells us it goes where? Up 1. Because that plus 1 is in place of k, so it's moving it up or down.
Bless you.
So here it would be up 1. So it would be a reflection across the x-axis if we have a negative being in front of that set of parentheses. Since there is no negative in front of the parentheses, it's not a reflection across the x.
That's what I'm saying.
The 2x, since it's positive, there is no reflection across the y-axis. But the 2 is in the place being multiplied in front of our x. Is the 2 being multiplied inside parentheses or outside?
Inside.
So since it's inside, it's talking about a horizontal stretch or shrink. Now, before we talk about stretch or shrink, with horizontal, guys, horizontal stretch or shrink, before we can determine it, we have to flip that value b. Since they gave us a value b of 2, we have to flip it, and if we flip it, it becomes
No, 1 over 2.
1 over 2. We flip it, so the 2 becomes 1 over 2. So whenever we talk about horizontal stretch and shrink, before we even determine which one it is, we have to take that value that's given to us and flip it. So here, the value b, that is 1/2. Is that greater than 1 or between 0 and 1?
Between 0 and 1.
So this is a horizontal.
You're not 17.
So this here, the transformation for this one here would be up 1 and a horizontal shrink of 1/2. So we talk about horizontal shrink or stretch. Shrink, we're talking about along the x-axis. So if it's shrinking, it's going inward, it's getting smaller along the x-axis. So if we look at this here, so instead of 1/4, we'll do 2 here. The blue one is just our x squared. The one in red is our 2x. And we can see horizontally it did shrink. So that 2x inside the parentheses squared will shrink it horizontally. Horizontally. So do we see how that is a shrink of 1/2? That's why we have to flip it.
Wait, if we were to shrink this one, it would be a straight up.
So let's look at this one here. G of x equals negative 3x squared. So we have 2. We have the negative and we have the 3. It's the negative or the 3. Either one or both of these inside parentheses.
No, it's across the x.
Since the negative is outside the parentheses, it'd be a reflection across the x. And yes, the 3 would be telling us that we have a vertical stretch or shrink of 3. Because with vertical stretch or shrink, we just take whatever the value is. If that value is greater than 1, it's a stretch. If it's between 0 and 1, it's a shrink. So here would be a vertical
Stretch.
of 3. And that's it. Questions on this here?
Everett, do you have any questions?
No, I don't have any questions. Why are you guys picking on me?
Yeah, Everett.
Shut up. You want this is mine.
Give it back.
Yeah.
Guys, don't pick on him.
Yeah! Finally, because the only person who's on my side today. I had 81 him and I was so freaking friends and act.
I didn't do something.
Shut up, you were such a liar. He said he was involved. No, I lost horribly.
All right, guys.
I couldn't even bully Mikhail, and he's easy to bully.
Questions on this here?
It's because he's fat.
All right, guys. Let's look at this here. We have 1/4 x squared minus 2. We have 2 transformations. Let's look at the minus 2 outside the parentheses first.
Is that thing blurry or am I just
It's a little bit pigmented or pixelated. So what would the minus 2 do? It would be down 2. Because if we add or subtract something outside the parentheses, it would move it up or
down?
down.
It's in the parentheses, so it's
Huh? I don't know. Questions on the up or down? So the other transformation is the 1/4 being multiplied with our x inside the parentheses.
so it's a shrink of something.
Well,
Horizontal shrink of 1/4.
almost.
How I could.
Because being multiplied inside the parentheses, guys. Since we're multiplying x by a number inside the parentheses, it is a horizontal stretch or shrink. Before we determine if it's a stretch or shrink, we need to take that value that they gave us and
Flip it.
flip it.
So it'd be 4.
Ah, dang it.
So it'd be 4. So this would be a horizontal what? stretch.
Bro, we figured out a way last year.
So vertical stretch or shrink, if that number is being multiplied in front of x outside the parentheses, it's exactly what it looks like, guys. Focus up here.
Sorry, Alex.
Inside the parentheses, we have to flip it. So this here would be a horizontal stretch of 4. So that means that this graph is going to open up wider than the original one. So if we look at this here, if we graph this other one, we can see that the one in red does indeed open wider than the one in blue. So the horizontal stretch does make it indeed a wider graph. Questions on this here? We ready for the next one?
How many more?
I don't think too many more. Let's look at this here, guys. Focus in. We have 1/3 x squared. Well, the only transformation is the 1/3. It's being multiplied by x inside the parentheses, so that would be what? It would be horizontal. And yes, since it is our horizontal stretch or shrink, we have to take that 1/3 and flip it. The horizontal stretch of 3. Questions on this one here? You ready for the next one?
Just an idea.
I think we have 2 more. This one here, 3 times x minus 1 squared. It has 2 transformations. We have the 3 outside the parentheses and the -1. The 3 outside the parentheses, since it's multiplying it, it's going to be a vertical stretch or shrink. Since it's outside the parentheses, it's exactly what it looks like. So this would be a vertical stretch of 3, because again, our 3, that stretch, that 3 value is greater than 1, so it has to be a stretch.
And then up 1.
Almost. So -1 inside parentheses, if we add or subtract to x, it's left or right, and it's the opposite of what we think. Since it's -1, it's actually to the
Right.
1.
Yeah. Well, kind of.
If we add or subtract outside the parentheses a number to it, then it would be up or down. Questions on this here? So the next one, so this +2 outside the parentheses would indeed be what?
It would be
Up 2. The +3 inside the parentheses would be our left or right.
Right. No left.
Since it is +3, it would indeed be left 3. But that leaves us with the last transformation, that negative outside the parenthesis, which would be a reflection across what? All right, guys. If the negative is outside the parentheses, it's across the x. If the negative is in front of the x, inside the parentheses, it's across the y.
Oh, wait, no, I did that. Hey, we don't judge here.
And that's it, guys. You have the rest of